The first thing I noticed at the gala was how easy it was to disappear. Hundreds of people filled the ballroom, polished floors, low golden lighting, the quiet clinking of glasses. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Executives clustered near the stage. Department heads moved between groups like practiced diplomats. I stood beside my wife when we first walked in. For about 5 minutes. Then her boss arrived. He was the kind of man who didn't enter a room so much as absorb it. People shifted toward him automatically. Conversations paused. Someone laughed before he even finished his first sentence. My wife reacted the same way everyone else did, but with a little more energy. "Oh, there you are," she said brightly, stepping forward before he even reached our table. She introduced me quickly, too quickly. "Daniel, this is my husband." The boss shook my hand politely, but his attention had already moved back to her. They started talking about a project, then a client meeting, then something that had apparently happened during the week. I stood there long enough to realize the conversation didn't need me, so I drifted toward the bar. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Corporate events are strange environments. People fall into roles without noticing. But the pattern repeated. Every time I spotted my wife across the room, she was beside him, laughing at something he said, leaning closer to hear him over the music, walking with him when the crowd shifted toward the stage. Not inappropriate. Nothing anyone could point at. Just exclusion. At one point she passed me near the dessert table. "Having a good time?" she asked, already glancing over my shoulder. "Sure," I said. She nodded, distracted. Then she moved back to him before I could answer anything else. The strange thing about public humiliation is how quiet it can be. No one announces it. No one reacts. You just slowly realize you're standing outside your own life. I took my drink and stepped away from the main crowd. That's when I noticed her. She had been standing across the room most of the evening, the boss's wife. I didn't know her name. We had never spoken. But she had the stillness of someone who was paying attention. Our eyes met, briefly. Not in the awkward way strangers look at each other at events. More like two observers who had just noticed they were watching the same scene. A few minutes later the host called everyone toward the stage for a toast. People gathered around the podium. Couples stood together. Executives took their places near the front. I watched my wife move instinctively toward her boss again. When the applause started, cameras flashed, and there she was, standing beside him while I stood 3 rows back between two strangers. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. After the toast, people dispersed again. I found myself back at the bar pretending to study the wine options. That's when a calm voice beside me said, "You look like someone trying very hard to be polite." I turned. The boss's wife stood there, holding a glass of champagne. Up close she looked composed, almost analytical. "I'm Daniel," I said. "I know," she replied gently. There was no accusation in her voice. Just recognition. For a moment neither of us spoke. We both looked toward the center of the room where our spouses were still talking. Then she did something unexpected. She placed her hand lightly on my arm. "Walk with me," she said quietly. "Let's give them something to talk about." It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't conspiratorial. It sounded almost practical. Before I could overthink it, we stepped away from the bar and walked toward the center of the ballroom. The shift was immediate. Not loud, but visible. People noticed. The boss noticed first. His expression flickered for a moment when he saw his wife beside me. Then my wife turned. I will never forget that moment. The look on her face wasn't anger. It was terror. Not dramatic terror. Just the sudden realization that the picture she had been painting all night had changed, and she hadn't been the one to change it. We stopped near a group of executives discussing something near the stage. One of them turned toward us. "Good evening," he said, smiling politely. The woman beside me answered before I could. "Daniel was just telling me about his consulting work," she said calmly. "It sounds fascinating." The executive's eyebrows lifted. Consulting. I nodded slightly. Risk analysis for logistics firms. His interest sharpened. Within seconds the conversation shifted. Questions followed. Real ones. About my work. About projects I'd handled. About a problem one of their companies was dealing with overseas. For the first time that night, I wasn't background decoration. I spoke, carefully, calmly. Across the room, my wife and her boss had stopped talking. They were watching. The strangest part was that I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. At some point my wife approached us again. She tried to join the conversation, but by then the moment had moved past her. The discussion had its own momentum. Eventually the executives were called away. The woman beside me released my arm. "Thank you," I said quietly. She smiled faintly. "You're welcome," she replied. "I think we both deserved better seating arrangements tonight." We stood there a moment longer. Across the room my wife looked uncertain for the first time that evening. Not angry. Just aware. When the music began again, and people started preparing to leave, I walked toward the exit. My wife caught up with me, near the coat check. Neither of us spoke immediately. For the first time all night, she seemed unsure what to say. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something simple. Humiliation only works if you keep standing where someone left you. Tonight, I had moved. And some silences, once broken, never returned to the way they were before.